Hi, I'm Certified Sommelier Beverly Crandon, and welcome to the Wine Down, where we make all things about wine extremely approachable, and it 'tis the season. So today, we're going to be talking about all things sparkling wine. It's that time of year again where we start to get festive and pop bottles of champagne, as they say. But you know what? This category, champagne or sparkling wine more specifically, can be a really tough nut to crack, right? For several reasons. Well, here's one big mistake everybody makes. Everybody calls anything with bubbles in it, they call it champagne. And you cannot do that. Champagne is specifically for a particular area, which is an area called Champagne in the northeast part of France. And it's made with strict rules and tradition. And so to put champagne on your label or to call it champagne means it comes from Champagne, France. But no fair, we've got a ton of sparkling wine that's around on your store shelves that are just delightful, and some made the same way as champagne. We'll walk through that. But another reason why I think sparkling wine is a really difficult one for people and they get intimidated is the price, right? You're looking at the price of champagne and thinking, wow, that is a bit too rich for my budget. But I'm going to tell you, I'm going to walk you through today some other things you can be looking at that are made again the same way that champagne is made, but a little more friendlier in terms of what it costs you at the end of the day. Lastly, I think people have a hard time with sparkling wine because usually when you're buying sparkling wine, it's because you're taking it out for a celebration, and that can be intimidating to make sure you're bringing a sparkling that the host is going to love or that the other guests are going to love. Listen, by the time I'm done with you today, your sparkling wine festivities for this holiday season is going to be a breeze. It's going to be a breeze. And you know what? Also, I think sparkling wine is one of the best food pairing wines that we have. So what I'm going to talk about today is not just for the holiday season. These are things you can use all year round. All right, so I want to talk today about the different types of sparkling wine you're going to find on your shelves, and we'll go through them, and for some of them, we'll talk a little bit about how it's made so you can understand the difference between the sparkling wines you're going to see in your store. And I want to start off with the big grand mère, which is champagne. Champagne, as I mentioned before, for you to call it champagne, has to come from Champagne, France, which is northeast France, okay? That's where it's at. Lovely, cool climate there. And with champagne, you know, there are 9 grapes that one could potentially put into your champagne because, of course, it's regulated. But there are 3 that you normally see, and that's Chardonnay. And if you see a sparkling wine made purely from Chardonnay, they're going to call it a Blanc de Blanc. Pinot Noir. If you see one made truly just from Pinot Noir, they're going to call it Blanc de Noir. And Pinot Meunier is the other. So those are the big 3 that you would see in champagne. But again, you are allowed to use 9 separate grapes. But let's talk about how it's made. So the grapes are harvested, hand harvested, generally earlier in the year than most other regions. Because you want to preserve the acidity, right? Like sparkling wine, champagne specifically is known for that lovely crisp acidity, which is one of the reasons it makes it so good for food pairing. But once that's done, the grapes are gently pressed, and first fermentation will happen in a large vessel, okay? And that's creating your base wine, which is like a still white wine, is what it looks like, all right? So then now what happens is they take that wine, that still wine, and they're put in individual bottles. And that's where second fermentation is going to happen. So they're put in individual bottles and they're sealed at that point. And then they sit there and they start to age on its lees. And lees are just yeast. So some of it's naturally occurring and some can be added to the wine. But the lees is what gives your champagne that lovely brioche, round kind of bready feel on the palate. And it's wonderful because it works well with that acidity to temper it and give you a nice smooth feel, a very round feel on the palate. I think now is a good time to stop and mention that it's that second fermentation in bottle. That's where all the bubbles come from. That's where the magic happens. That yeast will convert these sugars into alcohol and CO2, and that's where the bubbles come from. Now listen, if by rules of champagne, if something is non-vintage, it has to be aged second fermentation in bottle for 15 months. If something is going to be vintage dated, and just so we're clear, a lot of the champagnes that we find are non-vintage, right? So they're taking the best of, the grapes from different years and making their champagnes that way. But when you see something that's vintage dated, so I've got the date, the year of the harvest of those grapes, that's the house telling you this is a special cuvée, that this vintage was delightful. It was gorgeous. And that we had enough grapes to give you a wonderful feel on the palate. That's vintage dated. If it's going to be vintage dated, it has to be in that bottle, second fermentation for 3 years. Now, even though I say that, a lot of producers go far beyond. They will do second fermentation for 5 years, even more in some cases. But now, let's talk about that, right? So if I were to harvest my grapes in 2020, I can't monetize that until 2025, in many cases, 2026, and I'll get to that. So all of that waiting game goes into the price of traditionally made sparkling wine. So it goes into the price of your champagnes. Of course, in some cases, you're paying for brands, but it goes into the price of your champagne. When it's getting closer to time, you're going to start to see the winery start to do something called riddling, whereas they take the bottle that's got the yeast up in the neck of the bottle and they slightly turn it. Back in the day, everybody used to do it by hand. So imagine you had all those bottles, you had to turn it like that. Now they have machines for that, the gyro palettes for that. So that's riddling. So when the winemaker is thinking, okay, I'm pretty happy with how this is feeling on the palate, now we're going to disgorge the yeast from the neck. So that's going to go, the lees. And I'm going to add, because you're going to lose some wine, I'm going to add a little bit of wine back inside. It's called the dosage, to top up the bottle. Some people will add wine that's got a bit of sweetness to it to temper some of that acidity. And some will just add base wine that is not driven by some sugar or residual sugar. So when you see something saying zero dosage, means no sugar was added to that. And then once that's done, I will seal my champagne bottle, and some people will release it immediately, but a lot of people still even wait longer for another year, allowing the wine to truly settle and to truly get integrated. All of that goes into making champagne, hence the cost. And so when you see other people who are outside of Champagne, France, and if they talk about their wines or sparkling wines and they say it's made traditional method or metodo classico, they're trying to tell you that they too went through that long and laborsome process of doing second fermentation in the bottle. All right, now I want to move on to talking about Cremant, which is also from France. So listen, if champagne has your heart, but you just can't afford the price tag, look to Cremants. Cremants are from France, as I mentioned, also made traditional methods, made the same way that champagne is made. So second fermentation happens in bottle, that laborious process. There are 8 areas within France that are regulated to use Cremant on the label. And by seeing Cremant, you know it's from France and you know it's made traditional method. Cremants, a little different than your champagne, they're mandated to age anywhere between 9 to 12 months in second fermentation on lees. It just depends on the area. Most are 9, but Alsace, for example, that's 12 months. Okay, that's the difference there. So a little less aging time, second fermentation, but still delightful. You can find some really good Cremants for under $30, and they're going to knock your socks off. Allow everybody to enjoy a really good sparkling wine and probably learn something new about Cremant. So I call Cremant champagne's French cousin. But it's really cute. It's really lovely. I encourage you to go out there and try Cremant. Now I want to move on to Spain and Cava, right? When you think sparkling wine from Spain, you automatically think Cava. Cava is also made traditional method. A lot of people don't know that. Some people don't think it's Charmat method, and I'll get to what Charmat method is in a second when we get to Italy. But cava is made traditional method, so that means second fermentation also happens in the bottle. But listen, the story of cava and sparkling wine in Spain is quite complex, and it is a story that should be shared. So listen, in the 2010s, around then, 2010, 2011, cava came to new heights where there was a big demand for it internationally. And so you saw some really big producers start to flood the market with cava. And by flooding the market and with mass production, sometimes quality and terroir, those things weren't front and center. So what happened is that cava got a really bad name internationally. So in, I want to say 2015, 2016, it came to fruition in 2017, a few really premium producers from the Catalan decided to get together and try to form something that would allow them to label their sparkling wines a little differently, letting the consumer know that what's in this bottle is high quality and it's made in a particular way. It is not your traditional cava. And so that those group of producers that came together, and what was formed was something called Corpenat. And so if you see Corpenat on a label from a sparkling wine from Spain, expect high quality. For you to put Corpenat on your label, it means that your grapes were hand harvested, biodynamic, organic. It means that you're using specified grapes. It means that your grapes come from a finite area within the Catalan. You can't just get grapes from anywhere. It means you've got longer aging time too. So second fermentation in bottle, longer. As a matter of fact, when I look at what's coming out of the Corpenat producers, and I want to say there's about 27 of them today, it's very similar in terms of the rules and regulations that they apply on themselves to what you're seeing coming out of some of the really good grower champagne houses out of Champagne, France. So when you're looking at a Corpenat, something that's labeled Corpenat on the label versus a regular cava, what you can expect the difference to be is your cavas are going to be a little lighter, not as complex. The mousse or the bubbles will not be as persistent, whereas your Corpenat, you're looking at some complexity. In addition to getting the things that we normally expect early picked grapes for sparkling wine, like your great citrus, lemon curd, that type of thing, with your Corpenat, you can even expect some herbs. I find, depending on the makeup of the grapes, I get things like tarragon. It's very complex, very layered in a Corpenat. It's something that's going to keep you thinking and thinking and thinking. One thing I should explain where the name Corpenat came from. It comes from cor, which means heart in Catalan, and penat, derived from pene, the Latin root of pinedes. So you've got your Corpenat, which is the heart of pinedes. If you see this on your shelves, run out, get a bottle. Corpenat, even though I've given you all of those descriptors for it in terms of how it's made, it's very laborious and very strict in terms of regulation, really wanting to give the consumer quality in the bottle. You can see Corpenats in North America between $30 to $100. And even the ones at the $30 mark are just stunning. So that's Corpenat. Now, you can't talk sparkling wine without talking about Prosecco, which comes from Italy, northeast Italy in the Veneto. In one sub-area of the Veneto that is known for producing really, really good sparkling wine or Prosecco is Conegliano Valdobbiadene, and I drink from that area quite a bit when I'm going to grab a Prosecco. But let's talk a little bit about that. So Prosecco is not made traditional method. So it's not made the same way that Champagne is made, or Cremant or is made, or Cava or Corpenat, the things you just learned. It's made using a method called Charmat method, okay? And what this means is that the second fermentation, instead of happening in a bottle for Prosecco, happens in a large pressurized tank. So like your champagnes and all the other ones we talked about, first fermentation happens like you're making regular wine. That wine is then transferred to a large pressurized tank, right? And that's where the bubbles come from. Once the winemaker is happy, generally I would say about 3 to 4 months is how long it takes in that second fermentation. The wine is then bottled still under pressure to make sure I'm reserving or preserving those bubbles, right? When things are made using Charmat method, because that method is not just used in the Veneto only in Italy. Other people make sparkling wine around the world using Charmat method, but now you know what they're talking about. Second fermentation happened in a tank. When someone is doing that and they're making their sparkling wine using the Charmat method, they're doing it because they want to preserve the quality of fruit, the aromatics. It's going to be more lighter, a lighter mousse on the palate. Oftentimes with Proseccos, I get things like ripe pear, apricot, peach, some pineapple in some cases. It's just light, fun, fruity, very easy to drink. Now, I told you that when I'm grabbing a Prosecco, I'm going to Conegliano Valdobbiadene. In that area, DOCG is where you find most of the DOCGs coming out of there. With a Prosecco, you can have DOC or DOCG on the label. And what it's telling you is two things. First of all, DOC stands for Denominación de Origen Controlata. And DOCG stands for Denominación de Origen Controlata e Garantita. It's that garantita that you want to pay attention to. Listen, I say to people when you're buying wine in the store, do not complicate things. And if there's an indicator on that label that says, quality, pick that up, okay? Pick that up. So the DOCG versus the DOC. DOCG means that the grapes for this wine came from particular areas within the Veneto. Whereas the DOC, you can get Glera, that's the grape that goes into Prosecco. You can get Glera from a larger part of the Veneto. But DOCG means it came from a finite area. DOCG also means that these grapes likely came from higher elevation properties, and that means a higher quality of grape in terms of it getting its phenolics and ripeness and all that kinds of good stuff. It's all hand harvested as well, and it goes through trials and tests. You can't just put Prosecco DOCG on the label and be good with it. Like, there is rules and regulations where people will come by and you'll bring your wine store and they'll taste them to ensure that it's meeting that quality, that standard quality. So if you are a fan of Prosecco, and you maybe don't like as much acidity that you get with some of your traditional methods, champagnes or cremants or whatnot, if you're a fan of Prosecco, I highly encourage you, when you're in the store, take a look at what's on that neck of the bottle and pick up the DOCG. If you don't believe me, I encourage you to do a side-by-side with your DOCs and your DOCGs. I will say that the DOCG is going to be a step more complex. It might fool some people too on the palate to thinking it's a Cremant and not a Prosecco, but DOCG is where you need to go. Now, we also can't talk about sparkling wine from Italy and not talk about Franciacorta, okay? Franciacorta is a lovely, lovely sipper coming out of north central Italy, the Lombardy area. And as a matter of fact, Franciacorta, this area got its DOCG 14 years before Prosecco did. So it was the first sparkling wine out of Italy to get the DOCG status. Franciacorta is mainly made out of Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Pinot Bianco. And it is hand harvested to ensure quality, and second fermentation for Franciacorta happens in the bottle. So traditional method is like Champagne, Cremant, Cava, and Corponat. In Italy, they call it metodo classico, so the classic method of making sparkling wine. So second fermentation in the bottle. As a matter of fact, when we talk about that, the rules for Franciacorta, you can't call it Franciacorta unless the wine has gone through second fermentation for a period of time. So non-vintage, it's 18 months. That's 3 months longer than what's demanded in Champagne. For anything that's vintage dated, so I've got the year on it, it's 30 months. Anything that's got Reserva on it, 5 years is the minimum. What you find with Franciacorta is really rich, mouth-watering, sparkling wines. Not as much talked about, even though, it's been a DOCG, the first DOCG sparkling wine out of Italy. But if you see a Franciacorta on a menu or you see it in your store, I highly recommend you pick that up and give that a whirl. So there you have it. That's the wind down. All things sparkling wine. 'Tis the season. Made sense to do it. I certainly hope you guys learned a few things, and I certainly hope I made, getting a bottle of sparkling for the holiday season a little easier for you when you go into the store. And I also hope that you'll continue to drink sparkling wine even after the season is out. But with that, I would say cheers to bubbly, cheers to good friends. And now for the last word. Remember, life is too short for flat wine. Stay bubbly, and I'll see you at next pour. Cheers.